To finish the day, we're going to bring the focus back to Scotland, and my colleague Robert Peacock and I are going to talk a little bit about the To Absent Friends Festival. So, all of us, except the very young, have memories of people who have died but who remain important to us. Indeed, for many older people, there can come a time when the relationships they have with people who have died can outnumber the relationships they have with people who are still alive. However, public acknowledgement of the importance of these relationships and these memories is pretty limited. Many people have their own private ways of remembering dead loved ones, but talking about dead people isn't something we really do in public. I think as a culture we struggle with it. It can cause discomfort and embarrassment. People don't really know what to say. And this isn't good because most people who've been bereaved can be helped to some extent by supportive social networks where it is normal or at least possible to share stories of loss, whether that's recent or long ago. So how can we create spaces in 21st century Scotland where these memories and stories can be shared, and with this bring resilience and strength to communities and individuals in bereavement? The To Absent Friends Festival was established by the Scottish Partnership for Palliative Care and Good Life, Good Death, Good Grief as a response to these kind of questions. The idea was to create 1 week in the year when it's publicly and socially acceptable to remember, to tell stories, and celebrate dead loved ones. The idea was if we can help each other to do this in 1 week of a year, then it might just make it a little bit easier at other times too. So To Absent Friends is a people's festival of storytelling and remembrance. It takes place across Scotland in the first week of November each year. People can join in or not. There's never any pressure to join in. People can join in whatever way feels right for them, whether that is private, public, celebratory, reflective, creative or mundane. And Robert's going to talk a bit about some of the things people have done in Scotland as part of To Absent Friends in previous years. But first, we're just going to show you a really short film.
I could never quite get into his sphere with him and his friends, but I was always desperate to be one of his best friends.
Quite a strange character at first. We just thought, what's he doing hanging around with the students? He didn't seem to have a job.
He was funny. He was a proud man. He liked to do good for other people.
A red dress, white hair and this big smile, always smiling.
Always involved in pushing boundaries of what he did. And I think any time I go somewhere and I hear someone doing something a bit wacky and a bit strange, I think I always think of Sean.
Invariably, it was 3 o'clock in the morning before I'd get to bed if I was staying over at his house, because there was always a great conversation to be had.
Sometimes when I look myself at the mirror, I see his eyes, and there are so many things that remind me of Andrew.
Even though her needs and her illness and everything else made her absolutely within her right to say, actually, everybody pay attention to me, but she never ever did that, not at all.
We paused for the funeral, but after that, sort of ordinary life takes over, and it'd be nice to have the opportunity to sort of, with friends, take time out to sit back and remember those people that have lost. You don't often get the time to sort of sit and talk to friends about that kind of thing.
Your love keeps on going, and it just doesn't stop when somebody has died. So I think that it's still a loving thing that you're doing by remembering. My dad, Archie Stewart.
My friend Sean.
My son Andrew.
My best friend Maria.
My brother Philip.
So when I did that video, I was actually just a member of the public, and now I'm working here full time. So it shows how easy it is to engage members of the public with two absent friends. So these people are my grandparents, and they're all dead, and they've all been a long time dead. My granddad Peacock died 10 years ago. My granddad Barraclough died 40 years ago. But to me, they're still very much with me. There isn't really a day goes by when I don't think about them in some way, not necessarily a sad way or a significant way, but just something will prompt me to think about them. And I think that's true for most of us with people that we've lost. In fact, we were at the pub last night before the conference, got talking to a man at the bar, telling him about the conference, and his dad had died, and he said, I think about my dad now more he's dead than I did when he was alive. And I think that just shows that how the people who've died, we carry them with us every day, and none of us should feel embarrassed about talking about them. None of us should feel that it's an unnatural thing to do. And for me, to Absent Friends, that's what's beautiful about it, is that it gives us this permission and this opportunity to talk about something which is very natural and a very compassionate and very human thing to do. So I'm going to take you through some of the events that we've had as part of To Absent Friends, just to show you the scope of what we do. And then I'll talk a little bit about the benefits that have come about from it. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, this is Hibernian Football Club in Edinburgh. And they put together what we call To Absent Friends Wall, which is basically these posters, A3 posters, pinned up on the terraces on a match day for anyone to go and leave messages that they wanted to leave as tributes to people who had died. So it was including the old, the not so old, and the very young, all took the opportunity to leave a message for someone who had died. Some people wrote messages, some people wrote stories, some people brought photos and pinned them up on the wall. And a lot of it was made a lot more poignant because Hibs won the cup, and so the people were sharing the memories of the cup win with people who were no longer there. And the benefits of this were not just for the people themselves, but for the club. The club gets approached by a lot of people who say, oh, could you do a remembrance for my uncle or my granddad who died? And so the club themselves were delighted that this took place. So there's a quote from the chief executive: we're delighted it was so successful. The club is often contacted by supporters who have lost someone, seeking some kind of way to remember them. And To Absent Friends gave us a way to do that. Any sports club can do this. It's a matter of printing off some A3 sheets and pinning them to the wall. Any sports club, any organisation can do it, and it costs nothing, and you just need a time and a space to do it, and that's the kind of results that you can get. But the other thing about To Absent Friends, it's not just about these big communal celebrations. We use art, a bit like we were just hearing with the Groundswell project. Art is a good way of connecting people with discussion about death and dying. So Edinburgh Brass Band, for the past 4 years, have put on a free concert at St John's Church on Princes Street. Last year, Tartan Harmony, who is a female barbershop choir in Alexandria, they put on an event. We've had the spoken word community who got very involved as well. So poetry is a very good way of being able to commemorate someone. And this group, Poetry Circus, have put on an event every year. And they get up and they do a dedication to someone who's died. It could be someone significant, it could be someone famous, but it's either funny or it's very poignant, and it just shows the different ways in which you can remember people. And this is typical of the kind of feedback that we get. So people talk about the tears and the laughter and then the feelings of connection that is generated by having these kind of events. And also, because we're here today talking about communities, community groups get very involved in it. So up there, top left, is the Beacon Club, which is a dementia group in the Broomhouse Centre in one of the deprived parts of Edinburgh. They got a singer-along to sing some songs and use that as a spur for people to remember people by. Bottom left there, that's Breathe Easy Clackmannanshire, so people with lung disease remembering people that they've lost. And on the right there, there's a lot of this sort of creating things as part of To Absent Friends, so memory boxes, that kind of thing. This memory tree is actually Her Majesty's Prison Kilmarnock, because prisoners came along, and the prison chaplain said this was, the best event that she'd ever had. Some other examples: Cyrenians in Edinburgh helped us put on a To Absent Friends supper, where people, members of the community, could come along, pay £5, share over dinner, discuss with people who died. Top right is Compassionate Inverclyde, doing a remembrance cafe. I think some of our menus are down there, so it's a remembrance menu, gives you some prompt questions for while you're having a cup of tea and a bit of cake to ask someone, you know, like, who do you remember, what do you remember about them, and get the conversation started. Bottom right is Serenity Cafe, which is a cafe in Edinburgh that work with people who are recovering from addictions. They organised a To Absent Friends supper. They invited people to come around and remember the people who had died through addictions and abuse. And not everyone wants to do that. Not everyone wants to gather together with people and share their memories face to face. So we're also very keen on people having their own personal remembrances. So we do a lot on social media. We ask every year, we ask, change your profile picture to someone who's died and maybe share a story about them. This quite often prompts memories of like, oh, I remember that person too, or I remember my granny, or that kind of thing. And you don't have to do it online. People can go to a church and light a candle. You can get your friends around and have a look at some old photo albums, whatever is meaningful for you to be able to remember the people that you've lost. So all these ways are ways of taking part in it, but does it do any good? Right? It's fair enough doing that, but what is the point of it? From the feedback we've got, we are certain that people really, really appreciate it. So these are some of the examples of feedback that came from last year's event. So people talking about being given permission to talk about their loss, being able to talk about someone but not feel that sadness. People thought it was a very good way of talking about a horrid subject. So there's a lot of talk about overcoming barriers and perception. People talk about how healing it was. Some of the other ones. It's been lovely chatting about my husband, even though I had a wee cry. So tears are often a part of the event. And people saying they wish they'd done it years ago. They wish this sort of stuff happened years ago and they were able to share. And then when we ask people questions like, was it a positive experience? 90% of people say, yes, it was a positive experience taking part. That's about 9% of people said they weren't sure, and 1% said, no, it wasn't for them. Do you think it is helpful to have opportunities to remember those who've died? Again, 96%, 3% thought maybe, and 1 person thought no. Would you take part again? 100%, and that included the person who didn't like it. So even though they weren't sure about it, they thought it was a negative, they would still do it again. And why do people do it? Because, like I said, this could be quite a difficult, strange thing to do. People have their own reasons for doing it, and we don't assume what those are, but we do ask, and these are some of the suggestions that we had. So we didn't want to put words into people's mouths, but we offered a few sort of choices. A lot of people said, you know, to help with my grief, maybe if it's a recent bereavement, it's good to finally be able to accept that and talk about it. To relive good times, that was also something that came up. A lot of people were doing it to honour someone that they loved, so over 40% of people said that was one of the reasons to do it. But part of the reason we're here today, and the biggest answer, was that over 60% of people said they did it to be part of a community, and they really appreciated being with like-minded people and being able to share this with them and get mutual support.
Today's conference has raised various challenges. You know, the challenge of creating compassionate communities, the challenge of responding to the problems of socioeconomic disadvantage, challenges involved in bringing these issues into schools and workplaces. But today's event is also about trying to find some kind of actions we can take in response to these challenges. And I think that To Absent Friends is a helpful part of a response in Scotland. So, for example, we've heard about the importance of bringing death education and bereavement support into schools. And what we found is that To Absent Friends has been a really good vehicle for engaging with schools. For example, a couple of years ago we worked with the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, who went into schools and worked with children to write and perform poetry and music on the subject of loss. We've run several years running, we've run a kind of a photo competition, and lots of children have taken part in that. We've also heard about life, death and grief in socioeconomically disadvantaged communities. Experience has shown that To Absent Friends seems to have resonance for people from all walks of life. Participants have included prisoners, dementia support groups, people recovering from addiction, people with additional support needs, and many, many more other groups. We've also heard today about the importance of community development. So the idea of not imposing an idea from the outside, but of communities coming up with things themselves that are going to work for them. And To Absent Friends really fits in with that ethos. It's really flexible and it's not prescriptive at all. So on this slide, you can see prisoners having a coffee morning, a choir singing in a church, children on joining in storytelling on the street, and football fans writing tributes in the stadium. And today's had an overarching focus on growing compassion in communities. And as Rob was just saying, feedback from the festival shows that To Absent Friends can bring people together. So 62% of people felt that being part of a community was the most important, well, was one of the kind of best bits of being part of To Absent Friends. And I think that in this age where loneliness is so prevalent, that's a really important finding. Personally, when I've been involved, as a participant in events as part of To Absent Friends, I've experienced a sense of connection with people around me that is really rare to find with strangers. And I wonder if that is because loss is such a universal and profound experience that it has a huge power to inspire genuine connections between human beings. And To Absent Friends provides an opportunity for people to connect over that experience. To Absent Friends Festival is going to happen again this year, from the 1st to the 7th of November. We will be running a small grant scheme to support smaller community organisations to take part. So if that is something that you might be interested in, then please get in touch or join our mailing list. What we found is that the events that are most talked about are the ones that are organised by a member, by somebody who's enthusiastic and has a vision for their own community. So if the festival is something that appeals to you, either in a professional or a personal capacity, then you'd be very welcome to get involved. So thanks very much.